There's a scene in the movie Moneyball that I think about more than almost any scene in any movie I've ever watched. It's not the big moment. It's not the 20-game win streak or that dramatic trade deadline. It's a very quiet scene near the beginning of the movie. Billy Beane, as played in the film wonderfully by Brad Pitt, is sitting in a room of scouts, older men. These are baseball lifers, guys who have been evaluating baseball talent with their eyes and their guts for 30 years. And these scouts are telling Billy who to sign. And every single one of their recommendations is based on a feeling, on instinct, on the way a player swings his bat, on whether the guy has a baseball face. And Billy sits there and he listens. And then he says something that if you've ever been the person in the room trying to change how something is done, it will hit you like a freight train. He doesn't yell. There's no big speech. He just asks a question that exposes the fact that every single person in that room is solving for the wrong problem. That scene's not about baseball. It has never been about baseball. It's about every boardroom, every strategy meeting, every budget conversation, every hiring decision, where the people in charge are doing what they've always done because they've always done it. And nobody has the nerve to say, this isn't working. That's why when we come back, I'm going to be making the case for Moneyball as the most professionally helpful movie ever made. Welcome back. This is The Case For. I'm your host, Matt Campobasso. Here's what most people get wrong about Moneyball. They think it's a baseball movie. They think it's a Brad Pitt movie. They think it's about statistics. And on the surface, yes, it is the story of Billy Beane and the 2002 Oakland Athletics and how a small market team with no money used data to compete against franchises who were spending 3 times that annually on payroll. But that's the delivery mechanism. That's the wrapper. What Moneyball actually is, what Aaron Sorkin and Steve Zaillian wrote, and what Bennett Miller directed, is a 2-hour masterclass in how the professional world really works, how value's created, how it's overlooked, how it's hoarded by people who get there first, and how innovation happens. More importantly, how innovation is resisted. And really, how the person who sees the future before everyone else doesn't get a parade, they get a battle. I have recommended this movie to more professionals, more executives, more people trying to build something than any book or TED Talk or leadership seminar. Because unlike those things, Moneyball doesn't tell you how the professional world works in theory. It shows you how it works in practice. With all the politics, the resistance, the loneliness, the risk, and the long stretches where the scoreboard shows you that you're wrong, and the only thing keeping you going is your conviction that you're not. So today, I'm arguing that Moneyball is the most professionally helpful movie ever made, and I intend to prove it. Ladies and gentlemen of the listening jury, there are plenty of great movies about work. You've got Glengarry Glen Ross, which will teach you about pressure. The Social Network will teach you about ambition. Wall Street will teach you about greed. But none of these movies gives you a usable framework for how to actually operate in the professional world. They're portraits, they're cautionary tales. They're brilliant, but they're not helpful. Moneyball is helpful. It is genuinely, practically, structurally useful to anyone who has ever had to build a team, allocate resources, challenge a broken system, or make high-stakes decisions with incomplete information. And that's not every movie's job, but it is Moneyball's gift. I'm going to present 6 exhibits, and those 6 exhibits are going to be 6 lessons that Moneyball teaches better than any other film. Each one is a principle that applies far beyond baseball, and every one of them is dramatized so precisely in this movie that you don't just understand it, you feel it, you remember it, and you'll think about it when you walk into the next room after the credits roll. With that, let's get into the evidence. Exhibit A, the market is inefficient, and that's where the opportunity lives. The foundational insight of Moneyball, the real one, the one underneath the baseball, is this: markets misprice value. Not sometimes, constantly. The entire sport of baseball had been evaluating players the same way for more than a century. Scouts looked at their bodies, their swings, their confidence and charisma, and whether a guy had the look. And because everybody used the same criteria, everyone overvalued the same things and overlooked the same things. Billy Beane's insight wasn't that the scouts were stupid, it's that they were all anchored to the same set of assumptions. And those assumptions had never really been stress tested. The moment you apply different criteria, you see value that everybody else has walked right by. A player with an ugly swing but an elite on-base percentage. A pitcher whose fastball is average but whose ground ball rate is extraordinary. These players were available because the market had decided they weren't valuable, and the market was wrong. This is the single most transferable professional lesson in the entire film. Every industry has its own version of what constitutes the look. Every hiring process has its version of the "he's got the face of a ball player," that resume from the right school, a candidate who interviews well, the vendor with the biggest name. Moneyball teaches us to ask, what are we actually measuring? And is what we're measuring the thing that actually predicts success? Most of the time, the answer is no. And in that gap between what people measure and what actually matters, there is enormous opportunity. Exhibit B. Moneyball teaches us to build the machine and not the highlight reel. One of the most counterintuitive things Moneyball argues is that you don't build a great team by collecting great individuals. You build a great team by assembling the right pieces. Pieces that fit together, that complement each other, that collectively produce the outcomes that you need, even if no single piece looks impressive on its own. Billy Beane doesn't try to replace Jason Giambi. He can't. He doesn't have the money. What he does is he asks a fundamentally different question. What did Giambi produce? And can I reconstruct that production by combining 3 or 4 players that nobody else wants? The answer was yes. Not because those players are stars, but because their collective output fills that hole. Exhibit B is the lesson that every leader, every manager, every entrepreneur needs to hear. Stop trying to hire the best person. Start trying to build the best team. The best team is almost never the one with the most impressive individual resumes. It's the one where the pieces fit, where someone's weakness is covered by someone else's strength, where the whole produces something that none of the parts could produce alone. Moneyball dramatizes this more clearly than any business book I've ever read. Exhibit C, do more with less, or go home. The Oakland Athletics had $40 million of payroll. The New York Yankees had $120 million. And Billy Beane's job was to compete with them. Not to keep it close, to compete, to win. There's a moment early in the film where Billy's told, essentially, the problem is the budget and the solution is a bigger budget. And his response is to reject the premise entirely. The problem isn't the budget. The problem is the way that everybody thinks about the budget. If you play the game the way the Yankees play it, you're going to lose every single time because they're always going to have more money. The only way to win is to play a different game. That right there captures the reality of most professional environments. You are almost never going to have the most resources. You will almost never have the biggest team or the best tools or the most time. The question isn't how do I get more of those things? The question is how do I use what I have differently than everyone else using what they have? Moneyball makes this point not to be an inspirational poster on a wall, but as a lived-in, dramatized, high-stakes reality. Billy Beane doesn't do more with less because he wants to. He does it because he has no other choice. And that constraint, the refusal to accept the premise that more money solves the problem, becomes the source of the entire innovation. Exhibit D, and this is my favorite one. The first one through the wall always gets bloody. This might be the most important line in the movie, and it might be the most important professional lesson that anybody can learn. Innovation is not applauded when it arrives, it's resisted, violently, by the people who built their careers on the old way of doing things, by the people whose expertise suddenly looks less expert, by the same people who feel, correctly, that if this new approach works, it means everything they've been doing to that point has been wrong. Watch what happens to Billy when he starts implementing his approach. His own scouts revolt. His manager refuses to play the players that Billy acquires. The media mocks him. The losing record early in the A's season becomes evidence to everybody watching that this was the stupidest experiment in the history of baseball by an arrogant man who thought he knew better. And Billy has to sit there in that discomfort day after day with no guarantee that the results will come. He can't point to the future. All he can do is believe in it. If you have ever tried to change something at your organization, a process, a strategy, a culture, you know this feeling. The resistance doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside. From the people on your own team, from the people who are supposed to be on your side. Moneyball shows you that this is not a bug in the system, it's the entire system. And the only way through it is the willingness to be the person who gets bloodied and keeps on walking. Exhibit E, trust the process when the scoreboard says you're wrong. There is a stretch of the 2002 Oakland Athletics season, which is dramatized painfully in the film, where they're losing, and they're losing a lot. The data that helped them build the team tells them that it should be working. The math is sound, but the results aren't there yet. And everybody, the front office, the coaching staff, the press, the fans, is pointing at the scoreboard and saying, see, it doesn't work. This is the hardest part of challenging orthodoxy. It's not making the decision, it's actually surviving the lag between your decision and the results. Because every new strategy has a valley, a period where the old way has stopped working and the new way has not started working yet. And in that valley, you're completely exposed. You have no results to point to. All you have is your conviction. Moneyball puts us inside of that valley. You feel the doubt. You feel the isolation. You feel the very human temptation to abandon the plan and go back to what's comfortable, even if it means losing. And then the A's start winning. And they don't just win, they win 20 straight games. And that's not because the approach suddenly started working. It was always working. The scoreboard just had not caught up yet. Every single professional who has ever led a transformation or built a company needs this lesson. The scoreboard is always going to be a lagging indicator. If you wait for the scoreboard to validate your decision before you commit to it, you're never going to change anything. And finally, Exhibit F, adapt, or you're going to become the scouts in that room. The most uncomfortable scene in Moneyball is the scouts meeting. And it's uncomfortable because the scouts aren't villains. They're not incompetent, they're experienced, they're passionate, they're knowledgeable professionals who have devoted their entire careers to evaluating baseball talent. And they are completely, catastrophically wrong. Not because they lack skill, but because the world has changed and they didn't change with it. That's the part that should keep every professional up at night. The scouts aren't wrong because they're bad at their jobs. They're wrong because they're excellent at a version of their jobs that no longer reflects reality. Their expertise became a prison. The thing that made them valuable for 30 years became the thing that made them obsolete. Moneyball doesn't mock these men, it actually mourns them. And it asks you a question that is far more personal than any business book would dare. Which person in the movie are you? Are you Billy Beane, seeing the future and fighting for it? Are you Peter Brand, as played by Jonah Hill? Are you quietly holding the data that could change everything if somebody would just listen to you? Or are you one of those scouts who says he's got the face of a ball player and doesn't realize the world has already moved on? That question never expires. It doesn't belong to 2002. It doesn't belong to baseball. It belongs to every professional in every industry right now. And the fact that Moneyball makes you sit with it, it makes you genuinely unsure of your own answer. That's what makes it more useful than any leadership seminar ever produced. With the evidence in the record, let's take a look at the cross-examination. So you might be thinking, hey Matt, this is a Hollywood movie. It's dramatic, it's simplified. Aaron Sorkin writes dialogue no human being will ever actually speak. And guess what? Billy Beane didn't win the World Series. If this is supposedly the most professionally helpful movie ever made, shouldn't the protagonist actually win? This is a fair objection, so let me take it head on. First, yes, of course, the movie is dramatized. The real Peter Brand is a guy by the name of Paul DiBattista, and the real story is more complicated and it's more collaborative than the film depicts. That's what movies do. I'm not arguing that Moneyball is a documentary. I'm arguing that the principles that it dramatizes so well are real and transferable and more clearly communicated in this film than in any other medium I've ever encountered. Second, the World Series objection. This is actually the part that makes the movie more helpful, I think, not less. Because in the real professional world, you can do everything right and still not win the championship. You can build the best system, you can identify the best value, execute the best strategy, and you can still lose to a team with more money or more luck, or that goes on a hot streak in October. Moneyball is honest about that. It doesn't give you a fairy tale. It gives you something more useful. The understanding that the value of the approach is not determined by a single outcome. The A's didn't win the World Series, but within 2 years, the Boston Red Sox used the same principles to build an 86-year curse. The approach worked. The revolution happened. It just didn't happen on Billy Beane's watch, and that, too, is a professional lesson worth learning. So for those reasons, I'm going to overrule this objection. Now that we've closed the evidentiary record, I want to move to closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the listening jury, here is what I know. There are movies that entertain you for 2 hours. There are movies that make you think for a day. And then, very rarely, there is a movie that changes the way you see your own work, that installs a lens that prior to watching, you didn't have, that gives you language for things you felt but couldn't articulate. Moneyball is that movie. It teaches you that markets misprice value and that opportunity lives in the gap between what people measure and what actually matters. It teaches you to build teams by fit, not by name. It teaches you that resource constraints are not a death sentence. They're an invitation to think about problems differently. It teaches you that the first person through the wall always gets bloodied, and that the resistance will come hardest from inside your own house. It teaches you to trust the process when the scoreboard says you're wrong, because the scoreboard is a lagging indicator and conviction is not. And it asks you the most uncomfortable professional question that there is. Are you the person building the future, or are you the person who's clinging to a version of expertise that the world has already decided to move past? I have watched this movie more times than I can count. I've recommended it to colleagues, to mentees, to friends starting businesses, and friends navigating corporate politics, and sometimes to a friend who just needed someone to say to them, the way things have always been done is not the way things have to be done. Moneyball is not a baseball movie. It's a living, breathing blueprint. It's the most professionally helpful movie ever made, and if you have not watched it through that lens, I'm asking you to watch it again. Before we wrap up, here's how I want you to think about taking action on this episode and this topic. First, I want you to watch Moneyball this week, but don't watch it as a baseball movie. Watch it as part of your professional education. Every time something happens on screen, ask yourself, where have I seen this sort of an issue in my own career? You will be stunned by how many rooms you've sat in that it look exactly like that scouts meeting. Second, ask yourself the hard question. Which character in this movie are you right now? Are you Billy? Are you Peter? Are you a scout? Not which one do you want to be, which one are you? Are you challenging the orthodoxy, or are you the orthodoxy? Are you measuring what matters, or are you measuring what's always been measured? Sit with that. It's uncomfortable, but it's supposed to be. Third, I want you to find your inefficiency. What is your industry or profession's version of on-base percentage? The thing that actually predicts success, but nobody's paying attention to. What is your company's version of he's got the face of a ball player? Or the assumption that everybody accepts, but nobody has tested? I want you to find it, and I want you to name it, because I think that's where your advantage ultimately lives. So that's my case for today. If this one hit you, I would love to hear about it. Please post your thoughts on social media with #TheCase4 and let me know what's the movie that changed the way you work, and what's the film that gives you a lens that you didn't have before. It doesn't need to be about your career or your job. It can be about life. I'm a big fan of movies, and I love looking at them through these unique lenses. Thanks again for joining me. And remember, whatever your case is, don't be afraid to build it and carry it out into the real world.